Good morning. Mr. McGregor, we're ready to begin, I think.
Yes, my lord. The next witness is Mrs. Lindsay Guthrie.
Good morning, Mrs. Guthrie. Now, as you know, you're about to be asked questions by Mr. McGregor, who's sitting opposite. But first, I understand you're happy to affirm.
Yes.
Sitting where you are, would you repeat these words after me? I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
declare and affirm
that
I will tell the truth,
I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mrs. Guthrie. Now, we would plan to sit between now and our lunch break at 1 o'clock, but we'll take a break, probably about 11:30, opportunity for coffee, 15-minute break. However, if at any stage you want to take a break, for whatever reason, just give me an indication and we can take a break. So, please feel that you're in control of this situation.
Okay.
Now, Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Lord. You are Lindsay Guthrie, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you've provided a witness statement to the inquiry.
Yes, I have.
And for the benefit of core participants, that can be found at pages 68 to 161 of Bundle 2 of the witness statements. The content of your witness statement is going to form part of your evidence to the inquiry, but you're also going to be asked some questions by me today. If at any point you want to refer to your witness statement, please just do let me know and a copy can be made available. Equally, in terms of any documents that I want you to look at, they should come up in front of the big screen in front of you. If for any reason you can't see the document, please just do let me know.
Okay.
I'd just like to begin with your background and qualifications. Those are set out from paragraph 3 onwards of your statement. So you tell us that you qualified as a nurse in 1995, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then eventually you went on to obtain a postgraduate qualification in infection prevention and control.
Yes, I did.
We'll come on to discuss a bit more about training for individuals working in infection prevention and control. But in terms of the postgraduate qualification you undertook before you started working within infection prevention and control, did that include any training in relation to technical issues concerning building services? And by that, I mean water systems, ventilation systems, those types of issues?
Not explicitly, no, in terms of technical content.
And again, just a matter of generality, you're moving into work in infection prevention and control. Do you think the lack of training that you had before you took up that role was problematic in any way?
So I think as an infection control nurse, we do have an understanding of the built environment as a component of patient infection and risk. We are not specifically trained or weren't specifically trained in aspects of design or technical compliance. Those are quite separate. And I don't think that was I've ever perceived that to be a barrier in terms of my clinical infection prevention control practice.
And would that really relate to the day-to-day jobs of an infection prevention and control nurse?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you tell us within your statement that the building of a new hospital within a health board, that can either be a never in a career or potentially a once in a career event. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So in terms of that type of event, there's presumably going to be more of a focus from an infection prevention and control angle in relation to the built environment, water systems, ventilation, that type of issue. Would that be correct?
So I think in terms of the overall design, yes. But again, I think it's been clear or understanding what our role in relation to those particular aspects would be in a construction project, because that's very different to a role in the context of the clinical delivery of care.
That's really what I was looking for your views on, and I understand the evidence you've given in relation to the day-to-day activities. Helpful to have a general knowledge of these systems, but you don't really need any detailed knowledge. Is it then realistic to ask someone who is working in infection prevention control and only has a very basic understanding, doesn't get any specific training, to then work on one of these massive construction projects for a brand new hospital?
I think it's reasonable to expect input from an infection prevention control nurse or doctor in relation to aspects of clinical risk or infection control risk associated with the design. I think if the expectation is that infection control staff can advise on the actual design or construction elements of critical systems, that's not part of our it doesn't align with our training or expertise, and certainly would be very challenging.
Again, we'll come on and discuss this perhaps in more detail later on, but would it be effectively requiring a nurse to step out with the bounds of their professional qualifications and what they agree to do in terms of their registration with the Nursing and Midwifery Council?
That would be my assessment, yes.
And again, just for those of us, obviously you work in that space, can you just explain what you mean by that, why you think that would be problematic?
So as a registered nurse, my training has focused on patient care, so understanding disease and treatment and nursing care in its widest sense. And within the realms of infection control, my role is around understanding where, for example, water as it comes out of a tap, or the way that the hospital environment is configured or maintained, can have an impact on patient care. So it's understanding, so if a patient had an infection, if that organism had a natural environmental reservoir, I would look to see, in the context of the patient care environment, whether there were any aspects of the built environment which might have provided a reservoir and contribute to that infection developing. So my role is around clinical risk and clinical infection control. Where the bit that becomes more challenging as a registered nurse is if you were then to ask me around the component parts that constitute a plumbing system or a ventilation system, or the materials that are used within those systems, or any particular engineering or design consideration of those technical systems. I have no training, I have no professional expertise, I think, really to be able to comment competently in regard to that. And that then creates a bit of a challenge in terms of my professional registration with the Nursing and Midwifery Council requires me to always work within the scope of my professional knowledge, skill and experience. And actually, as a registrant with the NMC, I would be found lacking, actually, if I were to then begin to advise on things that I cannot demonstrate or really don't have the skill, knowledge or expertise to participate in.
The inquiry heard evidence from one of your colleagues, Sarah Jane Sutherland, yesterday, and one of the issues that she raised was a concern that infection prevention and control nurses were effectively being made quality control officers for the built environment, so being made to be a quality control officer for plumbing and ventilation, those types of issues. Is that a concern that you have?
Yes, it is.
And again, can you just explain why you're concerned about that and the implications?
So I think in the time that I've worked in infection control, which is 20 years now, there's been a material shift, I think, in what's being asked of us or expected of us as infection control nurses. And I think increasingly there are aspects of compliance and conformance, either in the design and the maintenance of systems, or the performance of systems that we are being asked to comment on. And I think there has been perhaps a sense that we will sign off or provide assurance around some of those systems. And I think there has been a gradual shift in that what we're being asked to comment on is not, from our perspective or from my perspective, I wouldn't perceive it as a clinical issue or necessarily something that I have the competence to comment on. And to some extent, I would suggest, or my interpretation of aspects of HEI Scribe in terms of that stage 4 sign-off, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about, there are questions within that document that I think there's an expectation as an infection control nurse we'll answer or we'll comment on, but actually we have no way of, so we don't have the competence or the expertise to actually make a definitive statement on whether something is compliant or not, but that is now the expectation. And I think that expectation has increased, and particularly within the last couple of years.
Thank you. If I just return to your experience and qualifications, am I right in thinking from June 2015 to January 2021, you were the lead nurse for infection prevention and control at NHS Lothian?
That's correct.
And could you just explain to the inquiry, what did that role involve?
So as the lead nurse for infection prevention and control at that time, my role was primarily to provide the subject matter lead for infection control within the board. There was a head of service, infection control manager, who had overall accountability in terms of what Scottish Government expect, but they were not an infection control qualified practitioner. So in terms of the subject matter, I provided that lead role in advising the infection control manager and then by default the board of any risks or issues. I provided professional leadership to the nursing team, and particularly around infection control content. And I had a significant element, I guess, of operational focus in being involved in incident and outbreak management, aspects of education and training, audit and surveillance. A part of my role included working with external stakeholders to develop national policy and develop expertise in the area of infection prevention control.
Thank you. And who was the infection control manager at NHS Lothian at that time?
So at that time, it was Fiona Cameron.
Thank you. And you mentioned your role as the infection prevention and control nurse. The inquiry is also going to hear from Dr. Inveranity, who is the infection prevention and control doctor. Could you just explain to the inquiry, what's the difference between the infection prevention and control nurse, the IPCN, as opposed to the infection prevention and control doctor, the IPCD?
So one of the key differences is that as an infection control nurse, my substantive role and the whole of my job is concerned with infection prevention control and the delivery of a work programme across all of those key components. Infection control doctors are usually, but not always, consultant microbiologists, so maybe consultant clinical scientists or virologists who are employed, so certainly in Lothian, through the Department of Laboratory Medicine. And a component of their role is to provide support for infection prevention control, and that's captured within their job plan. So they're not full-time in infection control. There is a component of their role supports infection control practice. There are some subtle differences, I guess, in that infection control doctors in their role as microbiologists and virologists are much more concerned with the diagnosis and treatment of clinical infection, so interpreting laboratory information, advising on appropriate antimicrobial treatment. And I guess what would be termed maybe the medical management of infection. And infection control nurses have a much broader remit looking at aspects of education and training for a wide range of staff. We have a role around audit and monitoring. We work usually together around surveillance activity, so looking at incidence and rates of infection. So they're complementary roles, but there are some key differences. And I think another component is that as an infection control nurse, my postgraduate qualification is in infection control, whereas anybody being appointed into the role of an infection control doctor, the infection control component of their specialist medical training is quite a small component, and it's not the whole part of it. So they are subtly different.
So again, just so I'm understanding things, complementary skills between the IPCN and the IPCD, is that correct?
Yes.
With the IPCD effectively being a resource that can be called upon as and when required?
Yes, so there's an allocation made within job planning.
Okay. And the two roles effectively working together to try to identify and minimise clinical risk with a view to ensuring patient safety within a hospital?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, just to complete your qualifications and work history, between October 2019 and March 2020, you tell the inquiry that you were acting head of service for infection prevention and control. How did that appointment come about, and what did it involve?
So the then head of service had a period of planned sickness absence, and there was a requirement to cover that role. So part of my job description as the lead nurse was that I would deputise for the head of service, and it was agreed that I would cover her role for that period of her absence, but that was in conjunction with my existing role. So it was an additional role and point of contact for the period that she was off.
Thank you. And you tell us that from 2021 until now, you're the Associate Director of Infection Prevention and Control. What does that involve, and how does it differ from your previous roles?
So that post was created, so the job description of the head of service and infection control manager was reviewed at the point that the post holder was retiring. And so my current job description, my post, includes all of the elements of the infection control manager role in terms of that board accountability and responsibility. But the fundamental difference is that I have retained an element of clinical responsibility, and as a subject matter lead in my current role, that the previous post holder didn't, and wasn't a requirement for infection control managers. So there's an element of my current role being an extension and a continuation of my lead nurse role, and where I've absorbed and taken on the whole role of the infection control manager.
Thank you. And I want to just ask you some questions about guidance that would be provided to IPCNs. But again, I think I picked you up in your evidence and in your statement as saying that effectively the built environment, we're talking about ventilation systems, water systems, healthcare acquired infections arising from the built environment. Was this an emerging area effectively through the 2000s?
So, no, I think there's always been a recognition, and there are a great many published case reports and outbreak reports in peer-reviewed professional literature where infections have arisen through exposure to pathogens in the built environment. So, for example, Legionella in a water system, or Aspergillus within aspects of brick or concrete. So I think it's not a new concept, and it's not the understanding of that isn't new. I think our understanding of some of the risks around how buildings are now constructed and maintained is continuing to evolve. But I think in terms of our understanding of microorganisms and their natural reservoirs, that's long established.
So known risks arising from things like water and the air within a hospital, is that fair?
Yes.
But in terms of the science, the research, was there exhaustive research that had been carried out in relation to the exact clinical risks that are going to arise from specific water systems and specific ventilation things in perhaps the early 2000s?
Not specifically in terms of the actual systems, to the best of my knowledge. I think that's, again, very much an evolving and emerging area of research.
And is that still an evolving and emerging area of research?
Yes.
Thank you. If I could ask you to have in front of you, please, Scottish Health Facilities Note 30. So that's in Bundle 13, Volume 3, at page 464. Bundle 13, Volume 3. Page 464. So you see SHFN 30, Part B, HAI Scribe, Implementation Strategy and Assessment Process, and it's the version from October 2014. Do you see that?
Yes.
We'll come on and look at some passages from this document, but can you just explain in general terms, what is this document?
So this is a document that's issued by, previously Health Facilities Scotland, National Services Scotland, that's provided in 3 parts, parts A, B and C. It really sets out some high-level principles or around infection control risks that might be identified within the built environment and high-level standards that we would look to achieve around fit and finish, for example, of different aspects of a hospital or healthcare premises. It sets out, it's really primarily concerned with risk assessment and management of risk. It's a document which has been mandatory in Scotland since 2007. Previous iterations, it was issued under CEL 2007-13, I think, and it remains mandatory in Scotland under instruction from DL 2019-23, which is a Scottish Government letter. The principal focus is around construction major refurbishment, but the principles contained within the document and the risk assessment process is expected for any built environment work in any kind of premises, so that the risks are identified and adequately mitigated.
Thank you. In simple terms, is this a tool for IPCNs to use?
It's a tool for members of staff working in a health board to use. It's not a tool solely to be used by infection controls teams.
Okay. So it would be used by IPCNs,
yes,
but it's not solely directed at IPCNs.
Correct.
Do you think that is generally well understood within the NHS, that this isn't a document just for infection prevention and control, that it's really meant to be targeted much more widely than that?
I think it's not consistently understood. I think our experience is that many professionals think that this is, as an infection control document, that we are the owner of the document, we're the owner of the process, and that we're the owner of any actions arising from that. So I think it's inconsistent.
Okay. So despite this guidance having been in place since at least 2007, even today, the understanding of that document and who it's aimed at is still, in your view, inconsistent?
I would say that's accurate, yes.
Thank you. If I can ask you just to look within the document to Bundle 13, Volume 3, page 468. Just below the bold text at the top, you see that it states, scrutiny of this guidance will highlight the frequent use of the word partnership. Successful use of HAI Scribe requires participation and cooperation, particularly between estates and facility staff and infection prevention and control teams. To manage the risks through use of HAI Scribe requires knowledge from many sources. However, it is not expected that any group will possess full knowledge or experience of another's discipline. It is expected, therefore, that there will be an ongoing liaison during each stage of development where appropriate specialist knowledge from all sources of relevant expertise can be derived and incorporated into the building, briefing, contract conditions, specification and quality control of construction and maintenance. Do you see that?
Yes.
And again, is that just really setting out what you told us in general terms, that this isn't just a document directed at IPCNs and IPC professionals in general?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. If I could ask you to look on, please, to page 470, and towards the two paragraphs towards the bottom of page 470. You see within paragraph 4, approximately 4 lines down, there's a sentence beginning, for HAIs to be reduced. Do you see that?
Yes.
So it says, for healthcare acquired infections to be reduced, it is imperative that infection prevention control measures are designed in and IPC risks are designed out at the very outset of the planning and design stages of a healthcare facility, and the input continues up to, into and beyond the final building stage. Do you see that?
Yes.
It's again, should the inquiry understand that this is effectively an ongoing process? You wouldn't just have this type of input at the beginning of a project. You really got to follow it through right to handover and possibly thereafter.
Yes.
Thank you. And again, just to flag again this concept of partnership, the final paragraph says to achieve this, it is necessary that designers, architects, engineers, facility managers and planners work in collaborative partnership with IPC teams, healthcare staff and users to deliver facilities in which IPC needs have been anticipated, planned for and met. Do you see that?
Yes.
If we look over the page onto page 471, you talked about various stages at which this document might be relevant, and we see 4 stages there. Is that what you were talking about in terms of the stages that this document would be relevant at?
Yes, that's right.
So we see stage 1 would be the proposed site development, stage 2 would be design and planning, stage 3 would be the construction and refurbishment, and then development stage 4 is described as pre-handover check, ongoing maintenance and feedback. Do you see that?
Yes.
We'll come on and discuss what happened on the project for the Royal Hospital of Children and Young People. But in terms of your understanding, when should that development stage 4 pre-handover check, when should that be done?
So my expectation around the stage 4 part of the process would be that that's undertaken on completion of all the construction or any refurbishment work. It would usually be done after what we call a builder's clean. So really the what we're looking at and looking to assure is the final product, if you like. So it's almost like akin to doing some snagging in a house. So we can't evaluate whether it's in a fit condition to hand over if there's still work ongoing to in terms of construction. So stage 4 is done on completion of work and on completion usually of the builder's clean, sometimes what's called a terminal clean or a domestic clean, so that it brings it to a position that effectively you could be moving patients into it. But that has to happen in advance of patient occupation and handover.
So if there was a new build hospital handed over by the entity that's built it to a health board, that should only happen after the stage 4 HAI Scribe process has been completed, is that right?
So my expectation would be that the stage 4 Scribe would be done before, I suppose, the contractors, if you like, were almost allowed to leave site. So on completion of the project, but before, so that you've got an opportunity to remediate any issues that you pick up as part of that stage 4 process. But it would be done at the point of completion of the project, yes.
So if you had a scenario whereby a hospital is handed over, accepted by a health board, without the stage 4 HEI Scribe being completed, what from an infection prevention and control perspective would be some of the risks of that happening?
So I would be quite concerned about that, because the purpose of the Scribe is, I think, gaining confidence and assurance that all of the things that we think are going to happen during that construction phase, and that the standards that are set out, that and the standard that we expect to see within the built environment as part to inform our ongoing use and maintenance of the department have been met, and that there are no hazards within the environment that haven't been recognised. And I mean, ultimately, we're looking for assurance, particularly with relevance to things like water systems or ventilation systems, that those systems are performing to the standard that we expect to see, because that's not something that you can't visualise that when you walk around a hospital. You require some form of testing and assurance to inform that. So I think that there would be a number of risks for a board in accepting any sort of major refurbishment or construction that hadn't had that sort of level of assurance, or that level of scrutiny, if you like, to use that word, over the quality of what's been provided, and that we're confident that it's safe and appropriate to use.
So if you skip the stage 4 HEI Scribe before the building's handed over, in that scenario, could a health board be satisfied that the hospital was safe for patients?
Yes.
It could be if you skipped stage 4.
If you skipped, I beg your pardon. So no. I think you wouldn't be able to evidence that or have assurance of that, and because the whole point of this is almost like a kind of key gateway in the project that's allows you to make a decision whether it is or isn't fit for patient occupation. So if you haven't completed the process, I'm not clear how you would say confidently that all risks had been mitigated and therefore it was safe.
Thank you. So in terms of stage 4 of the HEI Scribe, if a health board was considering accepting a hospital before that stage 4 HEI Scribe was completed, is that a decision that would be made by infection prevention and control, or is that someone else that would make that decision?
So that wouldn't be a decision for infection control. That would be a decision of the project team primarily, or the programme board that supports the project team and the project sponsor ultimately.
Okay. And if a project team came to you and said, we've got a new hospital, we're going to accept that building, and we're not going to do the stage 4 HEI Scribe before we accept the hospital, is that a course of action you would recommend?
Absolutely not.
If I could ask you to look on, please, still within Bundle 13, Volume 3, but this time to page 553. This should be an earlier version of Bundle 13, Volume 3, page 553. And if we could look down to page 554, you see in the bottom right-hand corner that this is an earlier version of SHFN 30, but this time from June 2007. Do you see that?
Yes.
So we've been looking at the 2014 version. This is a previous iteration. Would you have had knowledge of this document when you were working within infection prevention and control?
Yes.
And if I could ask you to look on to page 563, please. Paragraph 2.10. approximately 5 lines up from the bottom of that page, do you see a sentence beginning, "It is therefore intended"?
Yep.
And it states, "It is therefore intended as a first point of reference on prevention and control of infection for healthcare estates and facility managers, architects, builders, engineers, surveyors, health planners, and infection control teams working on healthcare estate, new build and refurbishment projects." Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, since at least 2007, the guidance has been saying this is not simply a document for infection prevention control professionals.
That's correct.
And then if we look over the page onto page 564, page 564, paragraph 2.15, just the final sentence, 3 lines up from the bottom, it states, "Much of the solution to the existing HAI problem lies in the effective dissemination and implementation of existing knowledge to all involved in a logical, accessible form." Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, it's not just for infection prevention and control. Other disciplines need to be involved in those types of discussions if you're looking to manage healthcare acquired infections. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes.
Ask you to look on, please, to page 573. In fact, before we do that, if we could go to page 568, please. Page 568 into paragraph 3.10. Do you see paragraph 3.10 states, "It is important to consider certain issues before construction work commences, including," and then if we look to the 4th bullet point there, it says, "The airflow and pressure differentials in the area. Differentials may be varied by external wind strength and direction." And then the next bullet point, "The susceptibility of the occupants to infection, e.g. through respiratory problems, immunocompromised or intensive care patients." Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, just as someone who's working in this space from at least 2007 onwards, was it a known issue that you had to get the airflows and pressure differentials right if you're designing a brand new hospital?
Yes, but I think that point also relates to risks associated during construction and the adjacency and the impact of airflow and pressure differentials in areas adjacent to work. It's not just around the design.
Thank you. And again, you need to be considering the individual patients that are going to be put into particular spaces. Is that fair?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. If we could look on to page 573. You see there's the bold heading, "Identifying risk."
Yes.
And then paragraph 5.3, "To avoid mistakes and pitfalls, the project team must consider issues including," first bullet point, "how will the product, equipment, room or clinic be used?" And then the second last bullet point, "What are the standards and guidelines from architectural and engineering bodies, government departments and accrediting agencies?" Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, as an IPCN, would you be expected to have a general knowledge of published guidance relating to the built environment, for example, SHTM 0301?
Yes, that would be my expectation as part of our general role.
But in terms of the multidisciplinary team that we see set out within the SHFN guidance, who would have overall responsibility for ensuring compliance with those published guidelines, particularly in specialist areas like engineering?
So I think if in the context of construction, design and construction, that would sit with the design engineers, the architects and the technical specialists. I think if we're describing the application of the SHTM in terms of ongoing maintenance, that would usually sit with an estates team who have the technical expertise to do that.
So working knowledge on the part of IPC, But really, in terms of the specifics, that would be for other members of the project team. You've mentioned designers, engineers, those types of individuals.
Yes, because they have the specialist skills and knowledge in the areas that the SHTM covers.
Thank you. Now, if we then look on to page 574, there's a bold heading at the top, common errors. So 5.5 states, common errors in design and construction adapted from Carter and Barr 1997 due to inept or non-existent risk management include, and then if we look to the second bullet point, it states incorrect air turnover and airflow patterns. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, it was well known in 2007 that a common error on these major building projects could be incorrect air turnover and airflow patterns.
Yes.
Now, if we think back to the 2014 version that we looked at previously, these common errors, they don't appear in that updated guidance from 2014. So your understanding working as an IPCN in this period, 2007 to 2014, by 2014, had these common errors simply been eradicated? Did they not exist anymore?
No, that's not the case.
And then if we look still within the SHFN 2007 to page 576 and to paragraph 5.19, there's a conclusion to this section which states the integration of prevention and control of infection, risk management and construction is in its infancy. Do you see that?
Yes.
And again, is that really consistent with what you told the inquiry earlier in your evidence, that yes, the kind of microbiology in terms of risk was known, but the specifics, that was still really an emerging discipline from an infection prevention and control perspective?
I think that's a reasonable statement, yes.
Thank you. And it continues, it represents a significant change in the management of healthcare facilities design and planning, which will take time to develop to a level at which the greatest benefits can be achieved. Just as important then is the need to carry out research in the area of risk management, prevention and control of infection in the built environment to produce sound, irrefutable evidence on which to base further risk management strategies. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, should the inquiry understand that at this point in time, 2007, there wasn't irrefutable, robust evidence in terms of the specific risks that could arise from the built environment?
Not in relation to all aspects of the built environment, no.
And in the period from 2007 onwards, are you aware of any specific research that's been undertaken to produce what's referred to here as sound, irrefutable evidence on which to base further risk management strategies?
I think that's a very broad question. I think in that period there have been a range of publications. There are numerous articles that would be available in peer-reviewed, published professional literature. But I think in terms of the specific evidence base to underpin technical or planning guidance, I'm not aware that there's been a significant development in terms of the evidence base over that period of time. And that's something that's currently being looked at.
Okay. So if we just take the example of ventilation, one of the things we'll come on and talk about is pressure regimes and air changes per hour. Are you aware of any specific research that's been undertaken in relation to those particular issues?
No, because I think the nature of that research would be very difficult. I think much of it is based on modelling, mathematical modelling, because in order to carry out research to provide the evidence base for example, whether 4 air changes or 6 air changes was more effective or safer, it carries with it inherent challenges in terms of research methodology and gaining ethical approval. So much of the guidance or the planning or technical guidance is based on the combination of scientific principles, understanding of, for example, fluid dynamic theory, engineering, experience and learning from published case reports and outbreaks, to provide I suppose it's an expert view or an expert professional opinion which draws from many different sources, because actually in gathering the evidence to a standard that we would look for in healthcare would be very challenging.
So it would be very complicated to try and carry out that form of research, is that fair?
That would be my assessment, yes.
You would need lots of disciplines involved from what you've said, is that fair?
So I think, yes, it would. I mean, you could carry out research from the point of view sort of laboratory, but not in a real world healthcare scenario. That would be very difficult to achieve.
Because again, the inquiry's heard evidence previously that one of the issues would be if we just take air changes in critical care, for example, the consensus view is that 10 air changes is safe. That's a generally recognised standard.
Yep.
But because you know that's safe, you wouldn't necessarily want to take individual patients and say, well, we'll try 9, 8, 7 until you got to a point that it was recognised it was unsafe. Is that what you mean when you're talking about ethical issues in terms of that type of research?
Yes, because you would always have a control group, usually in research. And so if you're trying to demonstrate the efficacy or degrees of efficacy, you may have a number of different groups, and it would be unethical to run a research with patients in an environment where you weren't going to provide any means of ventilation, because there would reasonably be a risk within that group, particularly if you were studying transmission of infection.
So in terms of the research that's been done today, is your understanding that it's effectively based on modelling and scientific plausibility as opposed to some form of detailed trial, for example?
So I don't have, I'm not an expert in the field of research in this area, but my understanding is that the research that's been done is more laboratory based, if that makes sense, or so it's done to simulate a healthcare environment and to look at the engineering components and the measurable components of sort of air quality and that sort of those sorts of measures.
Mm-hmm. And if we just think about that lack of research, robust research that's taken place, and the impact that could have on risk management strategies. If you're an IPCN working in an area, you have guidance. If you follow guidance, you can be reasonably satisfied that would be recognised as being safe. How difficult is it then practically to step away from the guidance in terms of doing a risk assessment, a clinical risk assessment, if you're not complying with the guidance?
So it can be challenging, because I think in order to undertake a risk assessment, I suppose you have to be clear why you would want to step away from the guidance, and there would need to be a really robust rationale for that, because generally speaking, my expectation would be if this has come out in published guidance and it's national guidance, then that's the standard we should be looking to achieve. In terms of risk assessment, it can be challenging, and really what we'd be drawing on then to inform that risk assessment is back to an understanding of microorganisms and their natural reservoirs, understanding factors around mechanisms for transmission, understanding host risk factors. So by that I mean, so what's the risk in this particular patient population? Are there intrinsic or extrinsic risks that we might want to consider? So there are lots of different things that we would apply to that have a sound scientific basis, And there are other aspects of that risk assessment which would rely on professional opinion and experience, and sometimes, if I'm honest, a degree of pragmatism.
Thank you. And I think you'd mentioned that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that there hadn't been this research done, but you thought there was perhaps research that might be ongoing at the minute. Did I pick you up correctly?
Yes.
And again, you said that research isn't your area, but the inquiry would be interested to know if there is kind of up-to-date research that's going on in relation to these types of issues we're looking at, covered in paragraph 5.19. Just in general terms, what's your understanding of the current research that's ongoing?
So I think the COVID pandemic has actually stimulated a lot of interest, and my understanding is that there are a number of professionals and experts in the field of fluid dynamics, and Professor Kath Noakes at the University of Leeds. I know Professor Hoffman has maybe been involved in some conversations and research. So I think the COVID pandemic's generated a lot of interest in understanding and stimulating research to understand how ventilation impacts on the risk of transmission and what standards we should be aiming for in order to mitigate risk and provide a safe environment. But that's all fairly recent.
And is that published research, or is that still ongoing and to be published?
So there are papers that have been published over the last couple of years. I don't think it's fully completed research. Again, this is not my area of specific expertise, but there have been a number of articles published around ventilation, different technologies that might be used to enhance ventilation, air change rates, and I believe that there is some research being commissioned through, I think, Glasgow Caledonian University by NHS Assure, but I couldn't comment on the detail of that.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you. Again, I'd just be interested in your views, though, as an IPCN. Published guidance would say for critical care, 10 air changes per hour. The hospital that we'll come on and look at in due course, it was only achieving 4 air changes an hour. Is it as simple as saying 10 air changes, we know that's safe from the guidance, that's the consensus view. If you don't have 10 air changes per hour in critical care, that's unsafe?
No, that's not correct.
Okay. And again, why not?
So I think the concept of safety isn't binary. It's not a safe versus unsafe position. I think what we're describing is a hierarchy of safety. So I think considering 10 air changes as being optimal based on all of the evidence and the expertise, and recognising then that we may have then the least optimal option. And ventilation in itself is not the only control that we would apply in terms of mitigation of risk of infection. We tend to talk about a hierarchy of control, which reflects a health and safety position, where you can't eliminate a risk, you seek to mitigate the risk. And there are a number of factors that you'll consider, the environment being one of them, and environmental controls offered by, for example, ventilation being another. So 10 would be considered optimal because that's what the current guidance based on expert opinion says is optimal. 4 would not be considered unsafe, but it would be considered less optimal than 10. And I think if you extrapolate that principle, we wouldn't say that having no air changes, mechanical air changes, and being wholly reliant on natural ventilation is necessarily unsafe. And certainly, thinking about the Sick Children's Hospital at Sheens Road, the old building that we had, we didn't have mechanical ventilation, but we wouldn't have ever said that what was being provided in terms of care in the old building was unsafe, and there was no evidence to suggest that that was the case. That's borne out by surveillance data, for example.
So, again, just so I'm understanding this, Sheens had no air changes per hour in critical care, and that didn't make it unsafe.
So it didn't have mechanical, so it had a natural air supply.
Yes, so it didn't have any mechanical, so you could open a window, for example, and you could get some ventilation that way, but it didn't have any mechanical ventilation.
Yes.
Okay. So if it wasn't a windy day, you might have either none or very few air changes per hour at Sheens.
Yes, so typically we would describe natural ventilation as achieving somewhere between 0 and 2 air changes, depending on the prevalent conditions.
Thank you. But as you say, that in and of itself didn't make the critical care department for children at Sheens unsafe, is that right?
That's correct.
And then you get 10 air changes per hour, which is the guidance. That would effectively be best practice, as I understand you. Is that fair?
That's correct, yes.
So should the inquiry understand then that if we're talking about a deviation from guidance, 4 air changes rather than 10, 10 is safer than 4, but just because you don't have 10 air changes an hour, that doesn't mean that the 4 is unsafe.
Yes, essentially.
So you're talking about 4 being safer than 0, not as safe as 10, but we're talking in concepts here of safer as opposed to a binary choice between safe and unsafe.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. And in terms of those judgments you said you had to make, if you depart from guidance, it would be presumably an IPCN that would be involved in that discussion about, well, how safe would a space be if you depart from the guidance? Like, how difficult an assessment is that to make in practical terms?
In reality, that's often quite difficult because it is based on being able to, I suppose, articulate the so being able to articulate the rationale for your risk assessment or for what you're advising. And really, I think that's something that becomes easier with experience. So you would absolutely need to look at all of the different factors and the situational assessment. So what is it you're being asked to risk assess? Where are you being asked to risk assess it? And then be able to articulate very clearly what you were advising and why you were advising it, and recognising that some of that is based on individual professional opinion.
So that's helpful. And perhaps just to put this in context, this is one email among many. I'll come back to look at more in more detail. But if I can ask you to look to Bundle 13, Volume 8, page 2215. And you'll see towards the bottom of the page, there's an email there on the 1st of July 2019 from Tracy Gillies to a range of individuals, Brian Curry, Ian Graham, Donald Inveriority, etc. You're not copied into this email, so it's really just for your views. It's Bundle 13, Volume 8, and it's page 2215. And what Ms Gillies says is, please correct or amend any misunderstandings. And you see the final bullet point on the page there, it says, the required standard as per SHTM 0301, Appendix 1, Version 2, February 2014 for critical care areas is 10 air changes, and less than 10 air changes per hour may facilitate airborne spread of viruses more than if 10 was achieved. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, should we understand, effectively that's just what we covered a moment ago, which is saying 10 is safe, so if you have any less than 10, you're going to have more clinical risk, but it's not this binary choice between safe or unsafe.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. And then if we look over the page onto page 2216, if we look to the final 2 bullet points, you see one states, if occupied now, there is risk to patients, visitors and staff of airborne virus transmission. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then it says open brackets, question mark, how much, close brackets, and difficulties in correcting would probably require a decant. Do you see that?
Yes.
And again, it's really that sort of question mark, how much. Again, is that one of the difficulties you would have working in infection prevention and control, that if you don't meet the guidance, it's really quite difficult to work out just exactly how much risk you're going to have when you step away from the agreed best practice standard?
Yes, it's very difficult to articulate how you quantify that risk and on what basis you would make that assessment.
If we look on, please, Bundle 7, Volume 1 to page 125. So Bundle 7, Volume 1, page 125. So you see that at the top, there's firstly an email from Donald Inverarity on the 5th of July 2019, to Tracy Gillies, Lindsay Guthrie and George Curley. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it states, thanks, looks, measured and addresses the points we covered, one typo spotted and highlighted below in green, all the best, Donald. And then there's a further email below that. Do you see that? Yeah. And this is an email from Tracy Gillies just to Donald Inverarity, Lindsay Guthrie and George Curley. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it states in the first paragraph, you're aware of the material concern we raised on Tuesday, 2nd July, regarding the shortfall in the standard of air changes provided in paediatric critical care areas, and that this was the reason why we did not believe we could provide safe patient care in this environment, even with an interim solution. See that?
Yes.
Again, could you just explain to the inquiry, why was the view formed that the critical care spaces weren't going to be an environment where safe patient care could be provided?
So I think, again, the aspect of safety is not just around the transmission of respiratory viruses. I think that keeps coming back into the conversation. So it was really about, I think that the question of safety, in effect, actually was at that point in time more about the extent of the work that we were beginning to realise would be required to rectify or remediate the situation and bring it to a point of compliance. And the complexity of trying to deliver that in an occupied building with a very vulnerable patient population actually in itself became would be a safety issue because that would be very high risk. It's very, in terms of HAI Scribe, it's the highest classification of work. It's very invasive. You would have to ensure really significant controls and sectioning off of aspects of the unit to achieve that work. There would be issues around dust, around noise, having to perhaps switch off the existing ventilation to allow cut through. So I think part of that assessment is about the provision of safe patient care during a period of bringing it to compliance. I think as well, what was being alluded to here is that the safest environment based on, so if the SHTM 0301 is safest in terms of optimal design, that's not just around the air change rate, which is important from an infection control point of view, but also to do with pressure differentials. And some of that's around infection control and thinking about other aspects of care that are provided in that space. So patients in critical care may require, for example, invasive procedures. So there's a need to ensure that when the environment we're providing care in is as safe as we can make it. And I think, I'm just going to read the email again.
No, please do.
So I think there was I think it was really more around the safety of the patients if we had to achieve the work after transition or the services had transferred across. I think that the scale of the work was quite significant. I think we were keen to ensure that what we were providing was safest, and perhaps maybe rather than safe. And I think there's also a consideration, and there was some discussion around understanding safety over a period of time. So accepting a system that hadn't been designed to the optimal standard, we would always expect that system to deteriorate naturally over time. So the performance and condition of that system would deteriorate. So in terms of safety, if you provide something which is less than optimal at the point of occupation, over time, the safety or the mitigation of risk that system provides will continue to reduce. So typically we would look, for example, in annual verification that a ventilation system would achieve 75% of its original design specification. So if your starting point is 4, it's safe, but it's not optimal. And over time, the safety that system offers will diminish. So I think there were lots of things, but I think that was, what was trying to be articulated in that what we had was not optimal safe, and that the solutions and the remediation would be complex.
So again, if I just take that in stages, from an IPC perspective, was there really a view that there should be compliance with the guidance for a new hospital because it's best practice?
Yes.
Okay. And that's entirely understandable. But again, I'm just interested in this view because the statement is made in quite bold terms. We do not believe we could provide safe patient care in this environment. Should that be understood that really what was meant by that was the safest patient care couldn't be provided against the guidance? But given that machines didn't have any mechanical ventilation and it was still deemed as safe, I'd be interested in your views in terms of a mechanical system in critical care that achieves 4 air changes per hour as opposed to the 10. Could safe patient care have been provided in that environment?
Yes, it could.
Again, just to try, again, so I'm understanding this, this may be relevant to what was effectively decided upon at later stages in the project. It would be wrong to assume at this stage in the project that non-compliance with the guidance ultimately always results in an unsafe space for patients. Really what we're talking about is if there's non-compliance with guidance, it wouldn't be as safe, but not necessarily unsafe.
Yes.
Thank you. There's just one final document in this sort of chapter of evidence that I'd like to look at. And if we could look to bundle 3, please, page 142. Bundle 3, page 142. And this is just a minute from an oversight board meeting from the 29th of August 2019. It's not a meeting that you attended, but it's really just for an observation, for your observations on a comment that's made. You see that there's a number of individuals present at this meeting, including Dr. Calderwood, the Chief Medical Officer, Professor McMahon, Dr. Gregory Smith, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer for the Scottish Government, Mr. James, the Director of Facilities of Health at Facilities Scotland, and Professor Riley, the Lead Consultant for Infection Prevention and Control for Health Protection Scotland. If I could just ask you to look on to page 144 of the minute, please. And it's paragraph 1.6, do you see that?
Yes.
So just to try and obtain your understanding of summer 2019, what the position was in terms of knowledge. The first point there says literature review now complete, demonstrated limited and suboptimal evidence around air changes and clinical outcomes. Most evidence had been expert opinion, modelling and outbreak reports. Do you see that?
Yes.
And is that really consistent with the evidence you've given this morning that, yes, there might have been some papers that were floating around, but there wasn't any detailed research that had been undertaken at that point in time?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. And then we see point 3, it says risk assessments to be complete before any broader review or commissioning group work. Do you see that?
Sorry, which point?
So it's point 3, where it says risk assessments to be complete. Risk assessments to be complete before any broader review or commissioning group work. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, we'll come on to see that there are risk assessments that are completed in relation to the change in critical care to positive pressure, 10 air changes per hour. Do you remember being involved in any specific risk assessments around about assessing the risk from an IPC perspective of 4 air changes per hour and balanced or negative pressure in critical care rooms?
At which period in time?
Really looking in the period around about 2019, 2020.
So yes, in 2019, one of the actions from the NSS report was to undertake that risk assessment, and Dr. Inverarity and I completed that to provide, I suppose, a view on what would be the level of risk from an infection control point of view associated with the ventilation parameters and the accommodation provided. So some wards had single rooms, some wards had single rooms and PPVL rooms, and some wards had a combination of those with shared bedroom accommodation. So based on what we had, what might be a risk associated with that and how we might mitigate that risk. And I think there was a risk assessment done from memory very early on. I want to say around about the end of July, maybe, possibly into August. And there was a risk assessment completed much later on before handover that really just provided assurance that based on what had been provided and what had been measured, we were happy that any risks were adequately mitigated. And we did ask for the authorising engineer for ventilation to comment on some of that.
We'll come on and look at that, because I think that's looking at, is positive pressure and 10 air changes per hour in critical care rooms, is that safe? I'm really interested in terms of whether the converse was done, because I think for understandable reasons, you say quite early on, your view would be really there had to be compliance with guidance, because for all the reasons you've given, you wouldn't want a system whereby it deteriorated over time. I'm just interested, was there a specific risk assessment done in terms of what had been built and found to be in the hospital? So 4 air changes per hour and balanced or negative pressure, was that done?
In relation to critical care, or relation? From memory, no, I don't think there was a specific written risk assessment on the 4 and balanced.
Okay. Can you recall why wasn't that done?
So I don't know if I can recall why it wasn't done. I think the overriding objective was, or ambition was, that we required a compliant facility in order to provide the optimal environment to provide care. And I think it would have been very difficult in the context of a critical care unit for us to provide anything other than a fairly... So we could risk assess it, but again, it would be based on opinion, and I think that's quite uncomfortable actually for me as an IPCN. I'm not sure that's something I would be... I think given the context we were working in and the scrutiny we were under, I don't ever recall being asked to do that. And I think we recognised that compliance was the best option. And there were other aspects of what had been provided that were considered non-compliant in terms of the design, ceiling construction, opening windows. So I think it was bigger than just air changes and pressure differentials.
But again, I entirely accept what you say about the difficulties, but presumably it was difficult at Sheens where there was no mechanical ventilation to undertake a risk assessment, but it was possible from an IPC perspective to work out from a risk perspective that Sheens was safe. So presumably that could have been done in relation to balanced and negative pressure and 4 changes per hour.
So in the context of an empty hospital, it's very difficult to do. In the context of an occupied hospital where you're essentially monitoring patient outcomes through means of formal surveillance, you've got a way of, I suppose, quantifying or evaluating whether what you have is safe. It's much more difficult to do that in the context of a building that hasn't yet been occupied or used by patients, if that makes sense.
And perhaps particularly difficult because there wasn't that robust bank of research that we talked about previously.
I think so, and I think there was a kind of paucity of even expert advice or guidance potentially on that matter available to us as an infection control team at the time.
Thank you. And again, if we could perhaps just return to the Oversight Board Minute, we're at paragraph 1.6 on page 144. You see paragraph 4, it states, air changes is not a specific hurdle to get over, but is the level generally found to be suitable in the majority of developed countries. Do you see that?
Yes.
Again, just so I'm understanding things correctly, what we see, and I think what I've described as best practice in SHTM 0301, was it your understanding that really the majority of developed countries, that's the standard that they're building new build hospitals to as well?
For critical care, yes, and in some countries, actually, the specification is higher.
Thank you. And then paragraph 6, it says air changes are not covered by guidance, not standards. Guidance states air changes can be a combination of mechanical and naturally ventilated, but there has to be an element of control about it. And then paragraph 7, NHSL did not make a decision to move to 4 air changes per hour. 6 air changes by multi-mode was accepted at the point of the settlement agreement. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, I'll come on again to look at that, but just in general terms, we're talking about this idea of derogations. At the point that you were involved in the project, were you aware of any specific agreement by NHS Lothian to derogate from the number of air changes set out for critical care in SHTM 0301?
Not in relation to critical care, no.
So had there been an approach in relation to other areas not relating to critical care?
So we'd been advised verbally that there had been an agreed derogation from 6 to 4 air changes in single room accommodation. And there was reference made to that in communications from, I think, 2018 onwards, but there wasn't an explicit communication, and I don't think we ever saw the risk assessment that supported that. But in relation to critical care, we were unaware of any derogation.
And if you had been approached by the project team and a conversation had taken place along the lines of SHTM 0301 says 10 air changes per hour, we're thinking of derogating down from that to a lesser standard, what would your reaction have been?
So our advice would have been that that was not an appropriate derogation to seek.
Thank you. I could move on, still looking at some guidance, and this time ask for your observations on SHTM 0301. We'll come on and look at the document. But if we think to SHTM 0301, the 2014 guidance, there's obviously the newer guidance in 2022. As an IPC professional, working with SHTM 0301, the 2014 version, how easy and user-friendly a document was that for an IPC professional to use?
I don't think it's particularly user-friendly because there are large sections of the document that don't really apply to the clinical aspect or the patient-facing aspect of infection control. I think the narrative, I think many of the statements contained within the document are clear and easy to understand. It's a big document, and I think it takes. I think navigating your way around any sort of large document can be challenging. But it's not from a nursing or clinical perspective, it's not a particularly user-friendly document. But I don't think it's designed to be really for clinical teams.
Again, just Thomas, is it really written for other professionals as opposed to clinicians or IPC professionals in your view?
Yes, I think I would see it more as a technical manual rather than a clinical guidance document.
And again, would you have had a working knowledge of, for example, table A1 of SHTM 0301?
Yes, so that would have been one of the most common parts of the SHTM that we would refer to if asked a question about ventilation.
And again, how easy did you find table A1 to use as an IPC professional?
So I think table 1 is probably one of the most straightforward parts of the document. It's quite clear in terms of the categorisation of different spaces. I think the only ambiguity really was around the general ward environment as to what exactly that was describing.
And what did you think it was describing?
So my interpretation of a general ward environment would be the footprint of a ward. So a ward is a collection of patient sleeping accommodation, office space, support spaces like sluices and treatment rooms. So there are a number of different rooms with different functions within the general environment, and there isn't a specific, so there may be spaces within that overall footprint where there isn't a specific entry in table A1. And so that would be my expectation of what the general ward entry is describing.
Thank you. If we could perhaps just look to SHTM 0301, it's in bundle 1 at page 1035. If we could look on to page 1041, please. And you see it states about Scottish Health Technical Memoranda. Engineering Scottish Health Technical Memoranda give comprehensive advice and guidance on the design, installation and operation of specialised building and engineering technology used in the delivery of healthcare. Do you see that?
Yes.
We just think back to what we were discussing a moment ago, some of the ambiguities that you mentioned arising from table A1. Did you understand it was comprehensive advice and guidance?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Albeit there were some difficulties and ambiguities in terms of trying to actually apply that guidance.
Yes, and I think in some circumstances the guidance will direct you out to other documents, and sometimes you get caught in a loop of being referred to other technical guidance, which sometimes then refers you back to SHT 0301. But I think in terms of the core component of design, installation and operation, I think it's fairly comprehensive.
And we see in the second paragraph, it states the focus of Scottish Health Technical Memoranda guidance remains on healthcare specific elements of standards, policies and up-to-date established best practice. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, was that your understanding working in this space at the time that really the best practice guidance was from SHTM 0301?
Yes.
If we could look on to table A1, which is on page 1058. Sorry, that's the first reference to it, but if we could look to the actual table itself. Which comes slightly later. If we look to page 1173. And you see that there's Appendix 1, recommended air change rates, and then there's various applications. So you've got the application general ward, do you see that?
Yes.
And then 4 or 5 down, we've got ward isolation room, infectious ISO room, neutropenic patient ward, and critical care areas. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, there's specific ventilation arrangements stated there for critical care areas, positive pressure and 10 air changes per hour. Was your understanding that that applied to every space within a critical care area or only to certain spaces within a critical care area?
So my interpretation of that would be that it refers to any patient areas, because other spaces that would be contained within a critical care unit, such as a clean utility or a dirty utility or an isolation room, have a separate entry and a defined parameter. So critical care areas is the entirety of the critical care unit with regards to patient accommodation.
So say, for example, you had a 4-bed ward in critical care. What was your understanding of what parameters would apply? Is it the general ward entry or the critical care area?
So it would be critical care.
And again, in terms of your involvement working as an IPCN, whenever SHTM 0301, the 2014 version, was in play, were you aware of any school of thought that in relation to critical care areas, the specialist ventilation parameters there, they would only apply to isolation rooms within critical care areas?
No, and that would appear to be wholly illogical, because there's a specific provision within Table A1 for isolation rooms, and it links out to a supplement which describes in more detail en-suite isolation rooms or PPVL isolation rooms.
So certainly any school of thought that involved the references to critical care areas just referring to isolation rooms within critical care areas, that wasn't something that you would be aware of at the time you were dealing with this guidance?
No.
Could I just ask a little clarification on your interpretation? So, as I've noted to you, you said your interpretation of critical care areas would be the patient area, therefore the area in its entirety. I suppose critical care wards might be set out in a variety of ways, but were you thinking of simply bedroom area, or would it include adjacent corridors, nurses' stations?
So I would apply or my understanding of this is that it would apply to patient care areas and patient bedrooms, because other parts of the ward invite the total footprint of the ward. So there's provision made for some spaces. Mm-hmm. Corridors, I wouldn't expect typically to be included, because corridors are not an area where care is delivered. Mm-hmm. So my understanding of this is around, this is where clinical care or services are provided. Corridors and other, for example, office accommodation, mm-hmm. is not covered by this, and the parameters for ventilation, to the best of my understanding, from SHTM references a different standard. So typically 10 to 12 litres per second per person, so that there is a source of fresh air supply or ventilation provided. Within clinical areas, or so where this applies is, so if there's a specific designation for a space and the function of that space, that's what these parameters in terms of air change rate and pressure differential apply to. Mm-hmm.
No. I just want to understand, and part of my difficulty is that I probably don't have a very good notion of how wards typically are laid out, but The standard now is a single bedroom for each patient. You've mentioned treatment areas, which suggests to me that a ward may have a treatment area which is not a bedroom. And I'm supposing a treatment area would be, on your interpretation, within a critical care area if there is treatment being provided there for critical care patients. I'm supposing that would be the case.
Yes, so that there's a provision made within Table A1 for treatment rooms. So if a treatment room was, I think it's on the next page, the parameters apply to that room, and that's partly based on the type of activity then that will be delivered in that room.
I think if we look on to page 1174, we'll see that there's a specific entry for treatment room.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Just the final issue that I'd like to raise with you in terms of this iteration of SHTM 0301 is on page 1159. And it's in relation to validation reports. So you see that 8.64 states, following commissioning and/or validation, a full report detailing the findings should be produced. The system will only be acceptable to the client if at the time of validation it is considered fit for purpose and will only require routine maintenance in order to remain so for its projected life. 8.65, the report shall conclude with a clear statement as to whether the ventilation system achieved or did not achieve the required standard. A copy of the report should be lodged with the following groups: the user department, infection control where required, and estates and facilities. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, what would you envisage in terms of that validation report? Is that something that is produced simply by a contractor, or would your view be that it should be an independent validation report?
So my view is that would be provided independently. And I think there is, from memory, some reference to that elsewhere within the SHTM. And again, I think that my understanding of that is that it lends a level of objectivity in terms of the functional assessment of what has been provided.
And again, just so I'm understanding, you would, infection prevention and control, be expecting a short report with a conclusion stating that the system is considered fit for purpose and it's only going to require routine maintenance. Is that what you would expect to obtain?
So I think we would expect to see a summary of the engineer's assessment of the system in terms of its compliance, and we would want to see confirmation that the parameters set out in SHTM 0301 had been met around both air change rates and pressure differentials, but there would also be, I guess, a level of detail provided about the other aspects or other parts of the system have been designed and installed in compliance with the guidance. And we need to see that, and we need that expertise and that report in order to adequately answer the question that's asked of us in HEI Scribe Stage 4, which asks if the system has been designed and constructed and validated in line with 0301. So we can only answer that if we've been provided with confirmation from somebody with the right expertise that is indeed the case.
Thank you. So whenever we see reference in 8.65 to achieving the required standard, should we understand that's the standard set out in SHTM 0301 unless there was a specific agreed derogation in place?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. Lord Brody, I'm conscious that's just after 11:30. I'm going to move on to a new document, so it now might be an appropriate point to take a break.
It would seem to be a good moment to take a break. As I said, Mrs. Guthrie, we usually take a coffee break about now, so I will try and sit again at 10 to 12. Thank you.
And
Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Lord Brody. Before the break, we were looking at SHTM 0301, the 2014 version. If I could ask you to have a look at the 2022 version, so that's bundle 1 at page 2263. Just before we go on and look at the table, do you think this revised guidance is an improvement on what went before?
I think there are aspects of it which are improved. If I'm honest, I haven't had the opportunity to read it cover to cover, so I think I've only really dipped in for specific points. So I think it's a very qualified assessment of the changes.
And in terms of when you say you think some bits have improved, and what you've looked at, what bits do you think are better?
So I think there's perhaps greater clarification around points which I understand to have been unclear for some parties around the definition of critical care areas and general ward environments. And I think there's wider provision for different scenarios or different types of clinical environments contained within the SHTM.
So if we look to, this time it's Appendix 2 that has the table of guidance, it's on page 2431. Bundle 1, page 2431. You see here, Appendix 2, Summary of Design Conditions. Do you see that?
Yes.
And this time, in terms of the application on the left-hand side, we've got general ward, level 0 and 1 care. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we look down 5 or 6 entries, we've got infectious diseases, isolation room, neutropenic ward, and critical care areas, level 2 and 3 care. Do you see that?
Yes.
And is that what you meant by being more specific in terms of the guidance that's now provided?
Yes, I think it provides a greater level of detail as to what that table alludes to.
And if we perhaps just look on to the abbreviations that are used at page 2487 and Appendix 12. See at the very bottom there, the last 2 entries are level 0 care and level 1 care. Do you see that? So level 0 is patients whose needs can be met through normal ward care in an acute hospital. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then level 1, patients at risk of their condition deteriorating or recently relocated from higher levels of care whose needs can be met through normal ward care with additional advice and support from the critical care team. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, anyone receiving level 0 care or level 1 care, would they ever be within the critical care department?
So that would not be my expectation, no.
And then if we look on over the page to page 2488, you see the definitions of level 2 care and level 3 care. So level 2, patients requiring more detailed observation or intervention, including support for a single failing organ system or post-operative care, and those stepping down from higher levels of care. And then level 3, patients requiring advanced respiratory support alone or monitoring and support for 2 or more organ systems. This level includes all complex patients requiring support for multi-organ failure. Do you see that?
Yes.
So although we see more prescription around about the level 2 and level 3 care, should the inquiry understand that from your perspective as someone who works in IPC, there's not really been a change from simply the general catch-all critical care, because anyone who's receiving level 0 care or level 1 care, they wouldn't be receiving that treatment within the critical care department?
Sorry, could you just repeat that?
I just wanted to check, and it might be easier just to look back to the table. If we look back to the table on page 2431, and there's the general ward with level 0 and 1, and then there's the critical care areas which now have level 2 and 3 care.
Yes.
Although that's clarified for anyone that doesn't work within a clinical environment, would your understanding be that although we now have level 2 and level 3 care, if a patient was being treated, cared for, or residing within critical care, they wouldn't be receiving the level 0 or level 1 care anyway?
That's correct, yeah.
So although it's been clarified, there's not actually any massive innovation or change from your perspective in terms of what we see in Appendix 2 as opposed to the old Table A1?
That's correct. It's just a further level of detail.
Having looked at that guidance, I'd now like to ask you some questions about your role within the project, and by that I mean the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People in the Department of Clinical Neurosciences. You tell us within your statement, I won't bring up the references, but at page 77 you describe your involvement effectively being as at arm's length until, you tell us at page 80, December 2018. So perhaps just in very general terms, tell us in the period up to December 2018 what involvement, if any, you would have within the project.
So between my return to NHS Lothian in June of 2015 to really the latter part of 2018, I didn't have any direct day-to-day involvement in supporting the project. That wasn't my role as lead nurse. Infection prevention control support to the project was provided by, at that time, a dedicated member of staff, Jeanette Richards. And my role was very much in terms of professional supervision and not line management, professional support and supervision of Jeanette in her role as her lead nurse. And that would include, and did include, aspects of support that she might be looking for, or for so it's almost like a second opinion. So really discussing issues that perhaps she wanted to just clarify or sense check that her interpretation was right, or where she was seeking support because there may be an issue that was not necessarily agreed or had become a point of disagreement within the project. And so to that extent, that's what I mean by my involvement was somewhat at arm's length, and I wasn't attending meetings, I wasn't in direct receipt of documents from the project team, that my involvement was with Jeanette and supporting her in her role and commenting as the lead nurse and the infection control lead at that time.
So that's the period up to December 2018. You tell us on page 81 that really from mid-June 2019, you're full-time in the project from that point.
So yes, and I think in the earlier part of 2019, again, so I hadn't replaced Jeanette's role in as much that I wasn't supporting the project full time, but from June onwards, because of the emerging issues, I was asked to essentially provide full-time support and prioritise support towards that as part of my role.
Okay, so up to December 2018, relatively limited involvement, full-time from June 2019. The inquiry's heard that Jeanette Richards retires towards the end of 2018, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So can you just explain in general terms, what's your involvement from late December 2018 up to summer of 2019?
So from the latter part of 2018, we had instructed or requested that the project team use me as the principal point of contact for a lot of, for any correspondence or points. We had successfully appointed Sarah Jane Sutherland into Jeanette's post as her successor. And in the period really from December 2018 until June, I had an active role in that I was supporting Sarah in her newly promoted role and taking a more active interest and more direct role in communicating, I think, with the project team.
Thank you. If I can ask you to have your witness statement in front of you, please. It's in bundle 2 of the witness statements. And if we could look to page 80, please, and paragraph 16. Page 80. Page 80. page 80, please. Paragraph 16, you say, my involvement in the project increased significantly from December 2018. You'll see that?
Yes.
And if we could look just 4 lines up from the bottom of that paragraph, you say the leadership and senior decision-making component of my role was also increasingly important over this period in light of the scrutiny being placed on the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital QEUH building project and emerging information about water, ventilation and design issues. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can you just explain what issues you understood were happening at the QEUH and how that was impacting on your role in the project, please?
So I think as an infection control team, certainly as a senior team, we had been aware for some time that there were concerns around the QEUH building and aspects of both ventilation and water components in the building. And there was concern that was translating into patient harm, into patient cases. And we understood there to be, I guess, a series of kind of IMTs, incident management teams, looking at that. So I think we were very thoughtful as a senior team that our understanding is that the QEUH project and the Sick Children's project in Edinburgh were being supported by the same design and construction team. So the contractors were largely the same. And I think we were quite thoughtful that we needed to, looking to understand if there were any aspects or any learning emerging from particularly the built environment that we could look for and seek assurance on in the Sick Children's building, and to understand, I guess, what those issues were. And I think over that period of time, there was really no information being provided to us as an infection control team from our national partners, so HPS and HFS at that time. And I think we recognised that there was concern around what was happening in Glasgow, and I think that was being played out in the media and certainly I think at Scottish Government. And the other context for us in Lothian at that time is that we were also running incident management teams in relation to an issue with water quality at the Western General in DCN Neurosciences. And then in the March of 2019, we were investigating an issue around cardiothoracic mould infections at the Royal Infirmary. So that gave us some thought around water systems, ventilation systems, because those are reservoirs for the organisms that we were looking at and the infections that we were looking at. So I think we were just trying to understand what the issues were and be alert to those, certainly as part of any conversations around HEI Scribe or any involvement with the project team.
And again, just so I'm understanding, from late 2018 into early 2019, these are effectively informal conversations with colleagues working at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. This isn't centralised communications that are coming from Health Facilities Scotland, Health Protection Scotland, or any other centralised body within either the NHS or the Scottish Government. Is that correct?
Yes, it was really using existing professional networks that we have as senior nurses or as infection control doctors, and that's quite common. I think we look to share expertise, share experiences, and look for pointers for good practice and solutions, and that's the way that we work in infection control. But there was no information or guidance being shared, and there wasn't even really any clear articulation around what those issues might be from the centre over that period. I think the first time we were aware, certainly around ventilation, there was something issued actually in March of 2019 around pigeon droppings and risks around cryptococcus. And we became aware throughout the second part or towards June 2019 of a report that had been commissioned in Glasgow around the water systems, which had been published, we think, in December 2018. But again, that wasn't proactively shared with us as an infection control service. So there was a bit of a gulf, a gap in terms of our understanding formally what was going on. And so we made use of those professional networks to try and gain more insight and understanding.
So in the absence of any form of centralised communications, you effectively had to fall back on informal channels of communications with colleagues working in the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital to try to get what I think you referred to in your evidence there as any learning points that could be taken from the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital to try and avoid any of those issues with the RHCYP.
That's correct, yes.
And again, just for completeness, we see that in your witness statement. If we look to page 85, please, paragraph 34. Approximately 6 lines up from the bottom of the page, you see a sentence beginning, information about the emerging issues. You see that?
Yes.
And you tell us information about the emerging issues in QEUH were shared in confidence directly between the infection control managers, Fiona Cameron from NHSL and Tom Wolfe from NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. For example, SBAR report summarising the situation, background assessment and recommendations, which was shared with me on 14 December 2018, following discussion on this point at the IPCT senior management meeting.
Yes.
Thank you. And did those types of conversations between IPC professionals working on your project and individuals working in the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, did they continue throughout 2019?
Through 2019 to some extent, but I think by early 2019, we'd certainly had correspondence or instruction around ventilation and plant rooms and bird droppings. And I think in the period between probably February, March to June time, that there was perhaps less correspondence, but I think as we got closer to June, July, and as information was emerging, certainly from the IOM reports towards the latter part of June, I know that there was some discussion directly, I think particularly from Donald Inverarity and his counterpart in Glasgow at the time, Dr. Teresa Inkster, just again to get a further update in terms of what their experiences had been.
And you mentioned correspondence between Dr. Inverarity and Dr. Inkster. Was Dr. Inverarity sharing with you what he was being told by Dr. Inkster in relation to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital?
Yes.
And just in general terms about the ventilation system, can you just give us we'll look at some of the detail in the emails, but just generally, what was Dr. Inkster telling Dr. Inverarity at this time?
So we were aware that there were concerns around the air change rates that had been provided in some of the rooms and the pressure differentials. We understood there to be concerns around whether or not HEPA filters had been provided, I think, within bone marrow transplant unit. We also learned about some other things that were not something we'd thought about before. So the name's gone out. So it'll come back to me. So basically, where there's the heat recovery system, where you're extracting air and you're potentially mixing dirty and clean air, thermal wheels. So issues around thermal wheels and concerns that potentially there was entrainment of dirty, contaminated air in the extract, and concerns around things like heater battery arrangements and that would lead to standing water in roof voids, which then created a risk of waterborne organisms. So those were the types of things that we were being advised on, that were issues in Glasgow. So I think that was something that we wanted to, I think, particularly focus on in Edinburgh.
And that's an emerging picture from December 2018 into the early part of 2019, is that right?
Yes.
So if we perhaps just look at one email, at Bundle 13, Volume 3, at page 462. So Bundle 13, Volume 3, page 462. And it's really the email just over halfway down the page.
Thank you.
You see there's an email from Donald Inverarity on the 27th of March 2019 at 11:20. Yes. Sarah Jane Sutherland, and you're copied into that. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if we just look to the final paragraph, Dr. Inverarity states, I'd been speaking to some of the ID consultants at QEUH and the Glasgow Children's Hospital yesterday, and they explained that all their isolation rooms were being refitted as the original design didn't seem to provide appropriate pressures and airflows when the rooms were occupied. Do you see that?
Yes.
And again, is that characteristic of the types of discussions that Dr. Inverarity was having with Dr. Inkster and then discussing with you?
Yes.
And at this point, still no centralised communications from HFS, HPS or any other central body within the NHS in relation to emerging issues at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital being fed back to the project team working on the RHCYP?
Other than the issue of pigeon droppings, no, not that I'm aware of or can find any record of.
Again, do you find that surprising that there's a major hospital, Dr. Inkster, who's working there, is communicating what she considers to be issues around about pressures and airflows, and they're not being communicated to the infection prevention control team working on the RHCYP?
So I think, yes, I think we did. I think it was a little frustrating, if I'm honest, and I think probably compounded by the fact that we were in regular correspondence and had representation from the nurse consultant at HPS and the principal engineer from HFS as part of our ongoing incidents in relation to water and ventilation issues in Edinburgh. And we were asking questions around water systems, ventilation systems. So there was plenty of opportunity, I think, for information to be shared. And I think our experience was that we were asking questions even around guidance or gaps in guidance that weren't being answered. I think appreciate that there's potentially a risk in communicating information in a situation that's still emerging and being investigated. But I think in the context of Glasgow had built a brand new children's hospital and Edinburgh were in the process of building and moving towards completion of a brand new children's hospital, our need and our risk, I think, was subtly different to that of other parts of Scotland at that time. And I think quite frustrating because as the leads on the ground, we were already being asked questions around ventilation, water safety. There were inquiries coming into the board, and we didn't really have, I think, any reference point or any guidance being provided on how to respond or what it is indeed we should be looking to investigate or mitigate against.
Thank you. And I just want to move on and deal with another issue, and it's really dealing with issues around about 4-bedded rooms and issues that emerged in relation to pressure and air change rates for those. So if I could ask you just to perhaps pick that matter up, if we look to Bundle 13, Volume 7, on page 37. So Bundle 13, Volume 7 on page 37. And it's really the communication between Jeanette Richards and Ronnie Henderson on the 23rd of January 2017. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, you address this within your statement and you say you didn't really know about this at the time, but it subsequently came onto your radar, these types of discussions. Could you just perhaps explain to the inquiry, how did you become aware of this issue?
So I think really my awareness of this issue in any significant way came about in preparing to provide a statement and evidence to this inquiry through the risk assessment that was provided. This isn't something that I have any recollection of being consulted on, and I can find no record of that. I've looked at email archives, I've looked at our own records. And in terms of this, what was being, I think, requested, I had no awareness of that.
So this type of discussion back in 2017, this isn't something that's being escalated to yourself for discussion or a decision to be taken on?
No.
And if we perhaps just pick up Mr. Henderson's email of the 20th of January, approximately halfway down the page, who says, "Hi, Jeanette. That's just it. It doesn't, there's some dubiety over a couple of things. One, can a 4-bed bay be described as a general ward? If so, what is the pressure relationship to the corridor, as there's just a dash in the box in the table you attach? I'm looking for infection control's take on a scenario such as if 4 patients with infection status unknown are in the room. What way do you want air to go? To the room from the corridor, or to the corridor from the room?" You see that?
Yeah.
And then if we look up to Jeanette Richards' response, she says, "The 4-bedded rooms are considered to be the general ward." Do you see that?
Yes.
"As you're aware, each 4-bedded bay has an ensuite toilet, neg extract, and an ensuite shower and neg extract." Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, again, just working in infection prevention and control, if there's reference to ensuite toilets, does that have any significance relative to critical care?
So critical care departments don't typically have ensuite provision because it's not required because of the patient type and the acuity of care.
Okay. So just again, to draw on your knowledge and experience, when Jeanette Richards there is referring to the 4-bedded rooms and referring to them having en suites, is that effectively a shorthand, as you would understand it, saying those rooms are not in critical care?
Yes, because in the way that question's been asked, it's around a general ward environment. I can't imagine any circumstance where we would consider that to include a critical care environment, because those are very distinct entities and they're treated in very different ways.
Thank you. We spoke earlier in general terms about the HAI Scribe for the project. Did you eventually come to be involved in the HAI Scribe process, particularly the stage 4 assessment for critical care?
Yes.
And can you just explain in general terms how you become involved and what your involvement is?
So we were aware in February 2019 through an all-persons email that the project had been handed over, and that caused us some surprise because the HAI Scribe Stage 4 was still outstanding at that point, and we hadn't been advised by the project team when that might be scheduled in. So there was quite a lot of discussion and dialogue within Lothian at the time, with particularly the HAI executive lead and others, just to articulate those concerns. We had arranged then subsequently with the project team to carry out the stage 4 scribes, and it was important, I think, given the situation we found ourselves in, and I think given all of the concerns there were about Glasgow, I think a recognition of how complicated the project in Edinburgh had been and the number of, I think, challenges and setbacks it had, and given that Sarah was new into post, I was really keen that I was part of that scribe and actually in some ways led some of that scribe activity. So we arranged in the late part of April and into May to split the hospital effectively into three components. So because we couldn't physically or from a logistical point of view look at every single room in the hospital. That wasn't our plan, and there had already been a number of what are called room reviews in advance of the Stage 4 Scribe, which would inform the Stage 4 Scribe. So basically looking at the room physically in terms of fit and finish and wider aspects of infection control, and looking for what I guess you would term snagging. So we arranged to look at, I think from memory, we did outpatients as one component. We looked at theatres and diagnostics in another, and we looked at inpatient accommodation, but we specifically wanted to look at Lochranza, which is the haematology oncology ward, critical care, because those are, so they're not representative of the rest of the hospital provision. And we looked at DCN acute care, which is representative of what I would call general ward provision, which I know is maybe not helpful in this context. So what a ward that provides medical or surgical care for patients that doesn't have that additional classification as part of the review. And we wanted to do that, and I think we were aware that there was a desire to complete that and move the project essentially towards final completion and allow patients to safely move in.
We'll just take that in stages. You say that you effectively discover that the hospital has been handed over without the Stage 4 HEI Scribe taking place, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And again, how did you find that out?
So we found that out, as a service, I found that out through an all-persons email that was issued in February of 2019, communicating that as a positive step forward, the project had been handed over and the building had been accepted by NHS Lothian.
If we just looked at that email, it's in Bundle 13, Volume 7, at page 75. So Bundle 13, Volume 7, page 75. And it's the email towards the bottom of the page from Carol Notman.
Yeah.
Which says, I'm delighted to confirm that we have now taken ownership of the new building at Little France that will be home to the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People, the Department of Clinical Neurosciences and Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. Do you see that?
Yes.
The inquiry's heard evidence that before the handover, there was effectively an agreement called Settlement Agreement 1. And it was whenever Settlement Agreement 1 is signed in the February of 2019 that the hospital is effectively handed over to NHS Lothian. Did you have any involvement whatsoever in what became Settlement Agreement 1?
No.
So the inquiry should understand that there's an agreement signed by NHS Lothian in relation to the project, and the process leading to that and the signature of the document is done without input from yourself as the lead infection prevention and control nurse for NHS Lothian?
Yes.
To an outsider looking in, that might seem surprising. What was your views on that?
So at the time, I was surprised and concerned. I've subsequently been advised, though, that process was primarily a contractual and commercial agreement, and typically infection control are not included in those types of discussions. It's not a clinical or an infection control issue. But at the time, I was very concerned.
Did you know what had been agreed within Settlement Agreement 1?
No.
Again, the inquiry's heard a lot of evidence about this, but there was effectively a technical schedule included within that, dealing with various issues concerning the ventilation system. Would you have expected infection prevention and control to have been asked for their views on any technical issues relating to the ventilation system included within that type of settlement agreement?
So yes, I would, because I think that's reflective of the questions that are contained in the Stage 4 Scribe, which are of a technical nature, and it would allow us to advise the project team and indeed the board of any infection control risk that may be associated with those issues.
Thank you. And did you raise any concerns that you had whenever you got the email informing you that the building had been taken over by NHS Lothian?
So I certainly discussed that in some detail with Fiona Cameron, the head of service at the time, and I believe there was some discussion with Alex McMahon, who was the HEI executive lead at the time. I discussed it with members of my own team and with Donald in Veracity. Because I think at this point in time, I think particularly around the transition of services from Department of Clinical Neurosciences, this gave us some real concern because we were managing an ongoing incident around water quality. And one of the control measures that we were describing as part of that incident management team was when we might move these patients into the new building. And so I think to be told that this was essential, our understanding was that the building had been handed over and that this would now be happening, and we had no visibility of particularly water quality at that time, was really quite concerning to us. And I think given what we understood from our conversations over 2018 from the Queen Elizabeth, I think we had a genuine concern that some of the issues which had been identified in Glasgow may subsequently be identified in Lothian, and having not been involved, it's very difficult then to be able to mitigate against that.
And in the period that followed, did you and your colleagues attempt to carry out the stage 4 HEI Scribe, albeit retrospectively?
So we not at the time, not in February and March. The Scribe we agreed that would be completed before the transition of patients from sick kids and DCN, and that's why it was scheduled in for April and May, with a view that we understood patients to be moving in the early part of the summer in July.
And again, we'll come on and look at the documentation, but just in general terms, explain to the inquiry, please, what happened whenever you tried to undertake the stage 4 HEI Scribe? Were you able to complete it and completely sign it off?
So no, because we had for some months been asking for information around water quality, particularly in the point I've just described around we're moving services in. We had, I think as far back, so we as an infection control service had been flagging since I think around about 2016 our expectation of validation of critical systems, because obviously the project timeline for the completion of the project kept being pushed out. So we were having conversation in anticipation of completion, which was then pushed out. So there was quite a lot of correspondence setting out what we expected to see in terms of ventilation, and particularly critical system validation, and also in relation to water quality, and that those are essential parts of being able to complete the stage 4 Scribe. So none of that information was available to us in April or May when the Scribes were undertaken. And in the intervening period between being advised in February 2019 that SA1, as I now understand it, had been concluded, we were advised in April of 2019 through our Infection Control Committee that there were a number of non-conformances which had been accepted by the board as part of that settlement agreement. And at that point, we had no understanding of what those were or what, if any, risk might be associated with them. And that information still wasn't available to us in the late part of April or early May when we were undertaking those planned HEI Scribe walk-rounds.
Now, with everything you've talked about there, all the information you would want that you didn't have at this point, how concerned are you at this point about the safety of this new hospital?
So I think I was very concerned because I suppose being aware that we as a service would be asked to essentially provide some level of assurance or comfort that there was there were no issues in that building, and that we weren't going to find ourselves in a situation I think that Glasgow had found themselves in. So because there was an awareness that water and ventilation and potential for patient safety was a real concern, and it was a live concern in Edinburgh anyway. So I think I was really quite anxious actually about it.
If we could perhaps look to Bundle 13, Volume 7, and to page 110. Bundle 13, Volume 7, page 110. Is that an email from yourself to Donald Inverarity? Do you see that?
Yes.
You say, "Hi Donald, can we have a quick chat about this please? Sarah and I attended a site visit to complete stage 4 of the Scribe on Friday. I wasn't happy to sign off the ventilation or water given the recent discussions at PLICC or concerns raised without discussion with you first." Do you see that?
Yes.
And again, is that the types of concerns that you've just addressed the inquiry on at this time?
Yes, so principally around water and ventilation, and to understand whether Donald had been in receipt of any of the information that we'd been requesting, because we'd been requesting it through, so I had requested information and I was aware that Donald was also requesting information. And
had, as far as you're aware, had Dr. Inverarity received any of that information?
No, at that time we hadn't received any of the information we'd requested.
And did you articulate your concerns to Dr. Inverarity?
Did I communicate?
Did you articulate your concerns to Dr. Inverarity, and did he share those concerns?
It's my understanding he did.
If I could ask you to look, please, to Bundle 13, Volume 7, page 102. Bundle 13, Volume 7, page 102. And if we could look to the email from your colleague Sarah Jane Sutherland on the 3rd of April to Donald Inverarity and a number of other people, including yourself. Do you see that?
Yes.
It says, "Hi, Donald, Elam and Lindsay. I met with Janice McKenzie, Clinical Director, RHSC/DCN Reprovision this afternoon to arrange a phasing plan to carry out HI Scribe Stage 4 review and sign-off. As I was not involved in any of the formal room reviews, and for assurance/governance purposes, I'm keen to review some of the areas and not just tick a box." Do you see that?
Yes.
So Ms Sutherland's saying that she's wanting to carry out a relatively intensive review for the purposes of the Stage 4 HI Scribe. Having been involved in that process, was that level of scrutiny welcomed by the project team?
No, I think it was. I think from their perspective, what they were communicating to us is that they felt that all of the room reviews had been completed and that all of the information and the points of assurance that we were seeking were already available and had been addressed. And my impression from some of those conversations is that I think there was concern that we were perhaps delaying the project further, and that was not welcome.
Thank you. Now, if we could look to the actual HAI Scribe form itself, please. That's within Bundle 5 at page 95. Bundle 5, page 95. And you see that there's reference to the HCI Scribe review team, which includes yourself. You see that?
Yes.
Have you seen this document before?
Yes.
And can you just explain to the inquiry, what's this document? What do we see here?
So this is the standard template that's provided in Scottish Health Facility Note 30 for the Stage 4 post-completion handover and review. It's provided as a Word, it's provided actually by HFS as a PDF version, so we tend to print it out in a paper copy to allow us to take notes as we do the physical walk round and review of the whichever area we're reviewing. And it contains the standard question sets and the points of assurance that SHFN 30 requires us to answer.
And if we look on to page 98, please, and to question 4.26. So to page 98. Question 4.26, is the ventilation system designed in accordance with the requirements of SHTM 0301 ventilation in healthcare premises? Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, is that a judgment that you could make as an IPC professional, or is that something that you would be asking someone else within the project team to answer?
So that's not a question that I can answer as an infection control nurse, and I would be looking for confirmation on that point from, for example, an authorising engineer or somebody with the relevant technical experience and knowledge to be able to advise.
And it's ticked with a star, and then there's some text with derogation 4 ACH an hour, single room risk assessed and approved. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you, any recollection? What does that text mean?
So we were verbally advised by Mr. Henderson that the system had been designed in accordance with SHTM 0301. And we asked about any specific derogations that we needed to be aware of, because it's not explicit in the question, but it's something that we would ask, because we'd want to ensure that any derogation was supported by a risk assessment. So we were advised verbally that there had been some derogation on single bedrooms, and that they were being provided at 4 air changes per hour, but that position had been risk assessed and approved by the project or the board. But that was verbal advice given by Mr. Henderson at the time.
Was there any suggestion at this point in time that there was any form of derogations from the published guidance in relation to critical care areas?
No.
No. Thank you. Then if I can ask you to look on, please, Bundle 13, Volume 7 to page 96. So this is an email from yourself to Janice McKenzie and Sarah Jane Sutherland dated the 13th of May 2019. Do you see that?
Yes.
If we look to the penultimate 2 paragraphs, you state, we are also awaiting for more information on approx 86 issues / non-conformances ahead of a meeting with George Curley and others on 5th June, ? We've been advised that many of these issues have been resolved, but currently have no detail in relation to this. Do you see that?
Yes.
What were you referring to there?
So that was referring to what we had been advised by George Curley at the Infection Control Committee in April of 2019, that as part of the handover and the agreement from NHS Lothian, there were a number of 86 non-compliances that had been accepted by the board. And we had we'd requested visibility of that to be able to provide a view on any infection control risk. At May 2019, we hadn't received that, and we didn't receive that until the 5th of June. That was the first time we'd had any visibility of that.
And you go on within the email to say, I think until we have more information, and as discussed, the IPCT would not be able to provide sign-off and assurance for the board that the building is ready to be occupied by vulnerable patients. Do you see that?
Yes.
And is that should the inquiry understand that's because you don't have the information to sign off the stage 4 HEI Scribe?
Yes, in relation to the non-conformances, but also in relation to commissioning and water sampling and validation of critical ventilation systems.
So in relation to the validation of the ventilation system in particular, did you have the validation report that would be required in terms of SHTM 0301 that we looked at previously, that pithy statement saying that there's full compliance with the published guidance?
So at the time of the HEI Scribe review, no, that wasn't available.
And was that a matter of concern to you?
Yes, it was.
And again, can you just explain why?
So I think principally because the question in the Scribe is asking for all part of the stakeholders to confirm that the system has been designed and is performing in accordance with SHTM 0301. Professionally, I would not be prepared to sign a document to that effect without being provided with evidence that was indeed the case, and that was my position and remains my position.
Okay. And in terms of the project team, at this point in time, were they planning to get that independent validation report that you've just addressed?
No, I think from conversations, their understanding was that they had already received that information as part of the project, and there wasn't at that point in time a plan to arrange any further independent validation.
So again, should the inquiry understand that the project team, not including infection prevention and control, they really just wanted to proceed with opening the hospital without obtaining the independent validation report?
That's my understanding.
Thank you. And unless yourself and your colleagues had pushed back on that notion, do you think the hospital would have opened without this independent validation report being obtained?
I think that's a very significant, I think that's likely.
But you pushed back on that notion. If we could just look to Bundle 13, Volume 7 at page 115. It's an email from yourself to Ronnie Henderson on the 17th of May 2019. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if we just look to the final two paragraphs, you state, I discussed with Donald the further ventilation validation programme you've arranged for next Friday, 24th May. I understand this to be 1 for theatres, cleaning all ducts, rebalancing and checking pressure cascades, and will not include further UCV testing, and 2 for isolation rooms, repeat all commissioning and validation tests. We do think that it would be useful to have independent validation by an authorising engineer, recognising that there is a cost associated with this. You see that?
Yes.
Whenever you say useful there, do you really mean essential?
Yes.
So in the period that follows, IOM Limited come in and do testing, and the inquiry's heard evidence that non-compliances in terms of the ventilation system with published guidance are identified. Can you just explain how you became aware of that?
So we became aware of that because by that point in time we were actively being included in meetings or asked to attend meetings to review the reports and the information as it became available.
And what was your reaction whenever you were informed that there were non-compliances with the ventilation system with published guidance?
So I think I was concerned that I think in some ways that our worst fears had potentially been realised, that there were some issues. And I think as more information was available through each sort of phase of those reports, I think my concern, I think, actually grew because of the scale and the extent of the issues that were being described.
If I could ask you to have in front of you, please, Bundle 13, Volume 7 at page 35. Is this a series of handwritten notes that you made at a meeting on the 1st of July of 2019?
That's correct, yes.
And can you just explain what's happening at this meeting that you attend on the 1st of July?
So this was, I think, at that point in time, one of twice daily meetings that we were having to review this information, given the imminent occupation by patients. And we were in receipt of the IOM reports and reviewing the information that was that was available through those reports. And so the table, the template at the top is something that I had pulled together largely for my own purposes, where we were trying to understand which aspects or which defects were being identified, and what we knew, and whether or not what was being described was fit for purpose and ultimately safe. But as time went on, more information was being provided, and by the 1st of July, information was available in relation to critical care.
And how close was NHS Lothian to opening the new hospital at this point in time, 1st July?
So I think at this point in time, this was within a week of planned opening.
Okay, thank you. And then if we look to the handwritten notes on page 36, top of the page in the middle, there's a box and an asterisk that refers to Pamela, and then number of air changes, ? Critical care. Yep. What are they retrofitting? Do you see that?
Yeah.
What were you noting down there?
So Pamela Joannidis at that time was the nurse consultant for infection prevention control in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. And the box is my handwritten, it's an action point for myself. And so I'd taken an action that I would try to speak to Pamela to understand the number of air changes. So that's the top line N of A/C in critical care, and what they, as in Glasgow, were retrofitting at that time. So I think it was to understand, again, what was Glasgow's experience, and was there anything that we could take and learn from Glasgow.
Okay. And then if we look at just maybe approximately halfway down the page, there's an asterisk that says critical care ? Derogation, none from original design, positive to negative, met environmental matrix for each was wrong. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Can you just explain what were you meaning by those notes that were made?
So my recollection of that conversation and from the note is that the issues around the performance of the ventilation in critical care had been identified. There was some discussion at the meeting about whether there was derogation, and that's something that IOM had referred to in one of the reports, in that I think they had advised, or had been advised, there may be a derogation available. And then it was confirmed in the meeting that there was no derogation from the original design, and that the conditions were expected to be met with relation to the environmental matrix for each room, I think there perhaps was an understanding from memory that that may be wrong, or that there was an error within the environmental matrix. And I think I've written positive to negative. So again, that I can't recall the exact detail of that point, but it's likely that that would relate to the 4-bedded rooms issue that we now understand.
So this has all been discovered around about a week before the hospital opens, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And if I could ask you to have your witness statement in front of you, please. It's within bundle 2. And if we look to page 124. And at the top of paragraph 138, again, tell us just what you've told us, evidence today. Nobody from IPCT was actively involved in the process of agreeing settlement agreement 1. If we jump perhaps 5 or 6 lines down, you see a sentence beginning, I would surmise.
Yes.
And you say, I would surmise that had independent water and ventilation commissioning and validation reports, the environmental matrix and details of the 81 non-conformances discussed as part of the SA1 process been made available to the IPCT in advance of the formal handover, it is highly likely that we would have highlighted the non-conformances and potential clinical infection risks associated with these. Do you see that?
Yes.
So should the inquiry understand your position would be if NHS Lothian had simply followed the guidance set out within HAI Scribe, that they wouldn't have been in a position where 1 week before the hospital was due to open that they found these non-conformance issues?
Yes, I think in simple terms, the information we were requesting in April and May, we would have been requesting in potentially January and February, and that the defects that were subsequently identified would have been known about earlier.
Once these issues are identified, you just explain what's your involvement going forward from here?
So after the production of the IOM report, so really from around about, I think, the middle of June onwards, that's when I'd been asked to prioritise support into the project, as had Dr. Inverarity. And we then, we were core members of the executive steering group, and we attended multiple meetings about so every aspect of I think what then followed around water non-conformances, ventilation non-conformances. We were involved in discussions around fire systems. We were asked to provide a number of written reports and risk assessments, so a much more intensive involvement and actually daily and weekly involvement in both what I would class the operational element of the response, but also in terms of that executive steering group and dialogue with Scottish Government through the Oversight Board.
And was there a continued dialogue between Dr. Inverarity and Dr. Inkster at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital?
From June, July onwards, not to the best of my knowledge, but that's something that Dr. Inverarity would be able to answer.
Well, just in case it jogs your memory, if I could ask you to look to bundle 13, please, volume 8, at page 2226. And it's the email towards the bottom of the page from Donald Inverarity to Alex McMahon, Tracy Gillies, George Curley, Brian Curry, Ian Graham, and you see that you copied into that. You see that?
Yeah.
Presumably this was one of many emails that you would be copied into at this point in time whenever the problems with the hospital had been identified.
Yes, so I do remember this correspondence, because this, so apologies, I think I was talking about the period from later on in July after the decision had been made not to occupy the hospital, but yes, I'm aware of this correspondence.
And we see there, Dr. Inverarity says, Dear all, please see the reply I received this morning from my equivalent, Dr. Teresa Inkster, in NHS GG&C, based at QEUH, and issues there she has had to deal with from an HAI risk, which we need to be aware of. She's happy for this information to be shared with NHS Lothian. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then what seems to follow is a paste of an email that the Dr. Inverarity received from Dr. Inkster, and it says, "Hi Donald, SHTM 0301 allows for thermal wheel technology, provided they're fitted with a purge sector. However, thermal wheels come with the risk of dirty extract air mixing with clean supply." Do you see that?
Yes.
And is that the issue you raised earlier in your evidence about possible issues around about thermal wheels?
Yes.
It continues, "In our paediatric hem-onc ward, non-BMT patients, we experienced a significant number of outbreaks over a 2-year period. These proved difficult to control despite aggressive IC measures. As part of the investigation, we asked for an external review of the ventilation system. What we found was air changes of less than 3 due to chilled beams, rooms at slightly negative pressure to corridor, thermal wheel technology and ductwork configuration issues." Do you see that?
Yes.
So situation in Glasgow that's possibly even slightly worse than at the RHCYP, that rather than the 4 air changes, they were only achieving 3.
Yes.
And Dr. Inkster continues, "All of this combined was felt to be a factor in these outbreaks, as mixing of dirty and clean air was occurring. HPS were asked to investigate, and the conclusion of their report was that our outbreaks were not due to practice or IC issues, but to the environment. Difficult to prove that retrospectively, but it makes sense." You see that?
Yes.
So Dr. Inkster raising issues in relation to the built environment at the QAUH, in her view, contributing to infection outbreaks. Just thinking to the timing when that comes in, how central are these issues that are being fed back by Dr. Inkster? How central are they to your thinking and Dr. Inverarity's thinking at this time?
So I think that the issues that were being described in that email are the same types of issues that were identified as part of that IOM review. There's I guess, a material difference in the patient populations between Edinburgh and Glasgow, which alters the risk associated with that, in that Edinburgh doesn't treat bone marrow transplant patients. We don't provide that service, and that patient population is recognised to be a particularly vulnerable, probably the most vulnerable clinical patient population. But the fundamental issues with the ventilation system that are being described are the same issues that were being identified in NHS Lothian.
And again, interested in your views, less than 3 air changes per hour linked to infection issues arising in the environment. How much of an alarm bell is that to yourself and Dr. Inverarity?
So that's a massive alarm bell.
Thank you. Lord Bury, I'm conscious that that's just 1 minute before one. That might be an appropriate point to break for lunch.
We'll take our lunch break, Mrs. Guthrie, and if you could perhaps be back for 2 o'clock.
Thanks, please.